The geofront smelled like ozone and sterile air, that peculiar combination of electricity and antiseptic that Asuka had come to associate with nerve's deepest levels. She sat in the entry plug suspended in LCL that filled her lungs with every breath and watched the technicians scurry across the observation platforms like ants attending their queen. EVA-02 loomed around her, a giant of crimson and steel. Its nervous system synchronized with her own, until she couldn't quite remember where her body ended and the machines began. This was supposed to be routine, a synchronization test. Ritsuko had explained it 3 times, with her usual clinical detachment, breaking down the technical specifications until Asuka's eyes glazed over. Something about harmonic resonance patterns and core stability metrics. Something boring. Asuka had stopped listening after the first minute and focused instead on her synchronization scores, watching the numbers climb with satisfaction. 82%. Higher than last week. Higher than Shinji's best run. From the observation deck, Misato's voice crackled through the comm system. "How are you feeling, Asuka?" "Fine." Asuka kept her voice level professional. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of knowing how much she loved this. How right it felt to be connected to EVA-02, to feel the giant's power thrumming through circuits that ran parallel to her own nerves. No anomalies. Synchronization is stable. Ritsuko's voice cut in more cautious. Core temperature is slightly elevated. Nothing critical, but keep an eye on it. We're going to run through the standard movement protocols, then shut down for analysis. Asuka suppressed a sigh. More waiting, more tests. More opportunities for them to find reasons to doubt her, to suggest that maybe she needed more training, more observation, more of everything except what she actually wanted to be left alone to do her job. EVA-02 shifted its weight in the restraint cradle, and Asuka felt the movement in her own bones. The giant was restless. Or maybe she was restless, and the synchronization was translating her impatience into the machine's subtle movements. At this depth of connection, it was hard to tell the difference. The first alarm came without context. A warning tone that made everyone on the observation deck turn toward their consoles in synchronized confusion. Asuka heard Ritsuko's sharp intake of breath over the comm, heard the rapid typing as the scientist pulled up data streams. "What is it?" Misato's voice carried the edge of someone preparing for combat. "Spatial distortion." Ritsuko's professional comm was fraying at the edges. High energy signature manifesting inside the geofront. Pattern classification it's not matching any known angel configuration. The second alarm was louder, more urgent. Red lights began to flash across the geofront's upper levels. Through the entry plug's view screen, Asuka could see technicians evacuating the platforms, their orderly retreat dissolving into something closer to panic. Then, she felt it. Not through the sensors, not through any technical readout, but through the synchronization itself. A presence pressing against reality, like a thumb against soap bubble skin. Something vast and alien and utterly wrong. Its attention focused on this chamber, on this moment, on her. "Get her out of there," Misato ordered. "Emergency shutdown now." But Ritsuko was already shaking her head. Asuka could hear it in her voice. "It's too late. It's already here." The air above the geofront split open. There was no other way to describe it. Reality simply tore a wound in space that bled light the color of diseased flesh. The thing that emerged wasn't an angel in any form Asuka recognized from the pattern analysis nerve drilled into every pilot. No geometric perfection, no crystalline beauty. Just wrongness, given shape a presence that made her eyes water, and her thoughts slide off its surface like oil on glass. Harkiel. The name came from somewhere, maybe from Ritsuko's panicked readouts, maybe from some deeper knowledge encoded in EVA-02's core. The spatial womb. An angel never recorded, never classified, never prepared for. It didn't attack. That would have been almost a relief, something Asuka could respond to with violence and training. Instead, it simply existed, and its existence bent space around it, like heat warps air. The geofront's geometry became suggestion rather than fact. Walls folded in directions that shouldn't exist. Distance lost meaning. Eva-02's at-field deployed automatically a hexagonal barrier of light that was the only thing keeping reality stable within the entry plug. But the angel's presence pushed against it not with force, but with inevitability. Two fields, two definitions of what space should be trying to occupy the same impossibility. Asuka felt the resonance building in her chest. Felt EVA-02's core responding to the angel's field with something between harmony and rejection. The synchronization rate spiked, 90%, 95%. Her nervous system lit up with signals that had nowhere to go, feedback loops creating patterns that existed outside normal causality. Commander Ikari's voice cut through the chaos, cold and absolute. Do not let synchronization exceed threshold. Shut it down. But there was no shutting it down. The angel's field had locked onto Eva-02's at-field like two magnets forced together, wrong sides first. The resonance grew stronger, a vibration that Asuka felt in her teeth, in her bones, in the spaces between her thoughts. The geofront's space began to collapse. Not inward, not in any physical direction, but sideways into geometries that human minds weren't designed to process. Asuka saw Misato reaching for her, saw Ritsuko's mouth open in a warning or a prayer. Saw the observation deck fold away into distance that couldn't be measured in meters. Eva-02 was moving. Not falling, not flying, just transitioning from one point to another through a path that bypassed the space between. The angel's wound grew wider, pulling them toward it with gravity that had nothing to do with mass. Asuka tried to scream, but LCL filled her mouth, and the sound came out as bubbles. The entry plug systems were going haywire, every readout showing contradictory data. Temperature simultaneously rising and falling. Pressure reading 0 and infinite. Time stuttering in moments that lasted too long and not long enough. The last thing she saw before the geofront disappeared was Shinji's face pressed against an observation window, his expression frozen between horror and helplessness. Then even that was gone, swallowed by light that tasted like copper and felt like falling. The wound in space collapsed behind them, and the angel vanished with it, its purpose served or abandoned. Nerves systems registered the event as a spatial anomaly, lasting 3.7 seconds. By the time the automated safety protocols finished cycling, the geofront was empty, except for confused technicians and the haunting absence where EVA-02 had been. Gone. Not destroyed. Not transported in any way the Magi supercomputers could calculate. Just gone as if it had never existed at all. In the command center, Gendo Ikari stared at the empty restraint cradle and adjusted his glasses with fingers that did not shake. Behind him, Misato was already shouting orders, coordinating search protocols, refusing to accept what the data told them. Ritsuko stood silent, her analytical mind already racing through the implications. The spatial signature hadn't matched warp travel. Hadn't matched any known phenomenon in Nerve's extensive database. Eva-02 and its pilot had been pulled through a tear in reality itself, and she had no idea where they'd gone, or if they could ever come back. The impact came without warning. Eva-02 fell through a sky that shouldn't exist, tearing through atmosphere thick with rust and ash. Asuka felt the world spin, felt gravity claw at her stomach as the entry plug screamed warnings in a language she couldn't process. The view screen flickered between static and impossible visions, red earth rushing up to meet her, structures of steel and smoke sprawling across a dead horizon, towers that jutted from the ground like broken teeth. She had no time to scream before they hit. The shockwave tore through the Titan forge like the hand of an angry god. Plasma reactors detonated in sequence, each explosion feeding the next in a chain reaction that turned the Western District into a lake of molten metal. Cooling towers collapsed inward. Conveyor systems carrying half-finished war machines buckled and snapped, spilling their cargo into the inferno below. The ground itself split open, venting superheated gas that had been trapped in Mars' crust for millennia. EVA-02 lay at the center of the devastation, smoke rising from its crimson armor in thick coils. The giant's chest heaved once, twice, as if testing whether breath was still possible. Inside the entry plug, Asuka gasped. LCL flooded her lungs in the familiar rhythm of synchronization. But everything else was wrong. The air beyond her viewport tasted like rust and fire, even through the filtration systems. The sky was red. Not sunset red or the red of storm clouds, but the deep arterial red of a world that had bled out long ago. She tried to move EVA-02's hand. The giant's fingers twitched, scraped against stone that rang like iron beneath its touch. Where am I? The thought came slow, weighted with the shock of impact. This wasn't Tokyo 3. This wasn't anywhere she recognized. The structures surrounding her were industrial nightmares, all angles and brutalist efficiency decorated with symbols she'd never seen before. A skull with a gear for a brain, prayers etched into metal in a language that hurt to look at, movement in the smoke. Asuka's hands moved to the controls by instinct, bringing EVA-02's head up. The viewport cleared enough to show them figures emerging from the ruins of the Titan forge. Humanoid, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, their bodies more cable and piston than flesh. They moved with mechanical precision, their faces hidden behind masks that leaked steam from vents where mouths should be. One of them raised something that might have been an arm, might have been a weapon. The air filled with sound. Not the clean report of rifles Asuka knew, but a deeper thunder. The roar of projectiles too large to be called bullets. They hit EVA-02's shoulder armor and exploded, showering the giant in fragments of its own plating. Asuka felt the impact like a punch to her own body. Pain bloomed across her shoulder phantom, but real enough to make her gasp. The synchronization interface translated damage into sensation, made her share in every wound the giant suffered. She didn't think. Her hands moved across the control's muscle memory, taking over where conscious thought failed. EVA-02 surged upward, rising from the crater it had created. The giant's feet found purchase on stone that cracked beneath its weight, and for a moment, Asuka saw herself through the eyes of those figures, below a titan of crimson and steel, rising from fire like something out of their nightmares. Good, she thought, and felt something fierce and sharp uncurl in her chest. Be afraid. More of them emerged from the smoke. These were larger walking machines that dwarfed even EVA-02. Titans, though Asuka had no name for them yet. They moved on legs like cathedral pillars, their weapons tracking EVA-02 with the patience of hunting dogs. One of them spoke. The voice came through external speakers, a language Asuka didn't understand, but recognized nonetheless a challenge, a demand. The universal grammar of soldiers facing something unknown. Asuka's finger hovered over the communication button, then stopped. What would she say? That she was human. That this was a mistake. The words felt hollow before she could even form them. These things, whatever they were, had opened fire without hesitation. They'd made their position clear. She shifted EVA-02's stance, and the giant responded like an extension of her own body. This was what she knew. This was what she was good at. The Titan fired first. Its weapon was massive, a cannon that would have served as the main gun on a battleship. The shell screamed across the distance between them and struck EVA-02's chest plate dead center. The world went white with impact. Asuka tasted blood, felt her chest constrict as if the blow had landed on her own body. Warning lights flooded the entry plug in crimson urgency. Armor integrity down to 70%. 70% from a single shot. What are these things? No time to wonder. EVA-02, but because Asuka moved the synchronization so deep that thought and action blurred together. The giant rolled left, came up in a crouch, and Asuka's hand was already reaching for the weapon mount on its shoulder. The progressive knife deployed with a mechanical click that she felt in her bones. She'd fought angels with this knife. Cut through at fields and alien flesh, proved herself against enemies that defied comprehension. But these weren't angels. These were machines, and machines could be broken. EVA-02 lunged. The distance closed in 2 heartbeats, and then the knife was sinking into the Titan's leg joint, finding the gap in its armor where flesh machines were always vulnerable. Hydraulic fluid sprayed like arterial blood, black and reeking of chemicals that made Asuka's eyes water even through the entry plug's filters. The Titan stumbled. Its companion fired, and Asuka felt the shot graze EVA-02's side, felt the heat of it through the synchronization interface. She wrenched the knife free and drove it home again, this time into the Titan's torso. Metal screamed. Something vital ruptured, and the Titan collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. 1 down. The victory lasted exactly as long as it took for Asuka to register the new warning flashing across her display. Spatial distortion. Reality itself was buckling somewhere above the Titan forge, splitting open like a wound in the world's skin. Purple light spilled from the tear. Not the clean geometry of an angel's approach, but something worse. Something that made her skin crawl and her thoughts scatter like startled birds. The air filled with whispers and voices that were almost human. Almost words she could understand, but wrong in ways that made her want to claw at her own ears to make them stop. Things came through the tear. Asuka's mind refused to process them properly, sliding off their forms like water off glass. They were pink, and they were laughing, and their laughter was the sound of madness given voice. Lesser demons, though she had no name for them yet. They poured into the Martian sky like a plague made manifest. The mechanical soldiers turned their weapons skyward. The Titans shifted their stance, targeting protocols, adapting to the new threat. And EVA-02 stood at the center of it all. Asuka's hands frozen on the controls as she watched a war begin, between forces she didn't understand. One of the pink things noticed her. Its attention felt like insects crawling across her skin, like eyes in the dark that had finally found their target. It opened its mouth and fire poured out, blue and terrible and wrong. Asuka's hands, Fuenen. EVA-02's at field deployed without conscious command, a hexagonal barrier of light that caught the fire and held it at bay. The demon pressed forward, cackling, and Asuka felt the field strain under the assault. This is impossible. This is all impossible. But the heat was real. The pain was real. The blood running from her nose was real. The price of synchronization pushed too far too fast. EVA-02 staggered. Another Titan had taken position behind it, weapon charging for a shot that would tear through the giant's back armor. The demons were descending in a swarm drawn by something they sensed in EVA-02 in Asuka herself. The mechanical soldiers advanced in perfect formation, coordinated by some intelligence that saw her as both threat and prize. 3 sides, 3 enemies. And Asuka alone at the center, her giant's armor already cracked its power reserves, draining with every second of combat. She wanted to scream. Wanted to demand answers from a universe that had dumped her into this red hell without explanation or mercy. But her pride wouldn't allow it. She was Asuka Langley Soryu. She was the best. And if this world wanted to kill her, it would have to try harder than this. EVA-02's eye units blazed crimson. The giant shifted into a combat stance, knife ready at field, flickering like a dying star. Around them, the battle for Mars raged on, three-sided and merciless. Asuka smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had nothing left to lose. Come on then, she thought. Let's see what you've got. The Titan fired, the demons shrieked, the soldiers advanced, and Eva's O2 met them all with fury incarnate. The astropath felt it first. Brother Methodius had served the Astronomicon for 63 years. His eye sockets burned hollow by the ritual that bound him to the warp. He had long ago learned to navigate the tides of that terrible sea, to distinguish the whispers of demons from the voices of distant worlds crying out for aid. He knew the texture of chaos, the oily wrongness of its presence. He knew the cold geometry of Necron tomb worlds waking. He knew the alien screech of Orc's psychic gestalt. This was none of those things. It came like a note struck on an instrument that shouldn't exist, a vibration that resonated through the warp without being of it. Brother Methodius jerked in his suspension cradle servo arms, clamping down automatically to prevent him from thrashing. Blood ran from his empty sockets, steaming where it touched the psychic wards inscribed across his skin. The sensation defied translation. A soul, yes. Human, almost certainly. But wrapped in something that wasn't an AT field, as the rest of humanity understood such things. This was deeper, more fundamental. An ego so precisely defined that it created its own boundary with reality, a wall between self and other, that the warp couldn't penetrate because it refused to acknowledge the warp's existence. It was impossible. It was happening anyway. Brother Methodius opened his mouth and screamed a single word across the psychic relay that bound him to Terra Anomaly. The message took 4 minutes to reach the throne world, traveling through the warp at speeds that made light seem glacial. 4 minutes for the psychic scream to pierce the infinite layers of bureaucracy and protocol to find the right ears in the right chambers of the Imperial Palace. 4 minutes during which Evangelion fought for its life on Mars. In the depths of the Titan Forge, Magos Dominus Kale Varin processed battlefield data with the cold efficiency of a machine. The organic Titan had destroyed 3 Warhound Titans and 14 Skitarii cohorts before adapting its combat protocols. It fought with a precision that suggested intelligence responded to threats with a speed that defied its size. Most troubling, it possessed no machine spirit. He could detect no holy interface with the Omnisia's sacred algorithms. Yet it moved. Yet it killed. The demonic incursion complicated matters further. The Chaos Rift had opened in response to the Titan's arrival, as if drawn by some quality in its presence. Kyle Varen's cogitators ran probability matrices, searching for correlation. Was the Titan a chaos weapon? A demon engine of unprecedented sophistication. But his Auspex readings contradicted that hypothesis. The Titan's pilot read as human on every scan. Female, approximately 14 Terran years of age, elevated stress hormones, but no trace of warp taint. A child, fighting a demon incursion and the Legio Metallica simultaneously, fighting and surviving. Kyle Varen issued new protocols to his forces. Capture, not destruction. Extraction of the pilot by any means necessary. Let the Inquisition determine what she was. Let the High Priests of Mars examine the sacred technology that could create such a thing. Let someone else make the decision about whether to save her or kill her. The battle raged across 6 square kilometers of Martian surface. Astra Militarum forces deployed from underground bunkers, their orders clear, contain the threat, minimize collateral damage to the Forge infrastructure, await reinforcement from Astartes forces. Las fire lit the red sky in brilliant streams, and for a few seconds at a time, it seemed as if they were making progress. The organic Titan staggered under the concentrated fire. Its armor cracked. It fell to one knee. Then it rose again, and the fury in its movement suggested that pain only made it more dangerous. Asuka couldn't feel her hands anymore. The entry plug's neural interface had been active for too long. Synchronization pushed far beyond safe limits. Her thoughts blurred at the edges, consciousness bleeding into Eva-02's awareness until she couldn't remember where her body ended and the giant's began. Every wound the Eva sustained echoed through her nervous system. Every impact rattled her bones. She'd stopped counting enemies after the first 100. They just kept coming, pouring from facilities she couldn't see, coordinated by intelligence networks she couldn't intercept. The pink laughing things were the worst. They didn't die properly. You could cut them down, and they'd dissolve into light and mad giggling, only to reform somewhere else, somewhere you weren't looking. The progressive knife was dull now, its edge worn from cutting through armor plate and demon flesh. EVA-02's left arm hung useless servo muscles severed by a shot that had slipped past the AT field. Power reserves were at 40% and dropping. The umbilical cable had been torn away in the first minutes of combat. No resupply, no reinforcement, no way home. Asuka laughed, and the sound was slightly unhinged even to her own ears. "This is fine. This is totally fine. I've fought worse." She hadn't, actually. But admitting that felt like surrender, and surrender had never been in her vocabulary. The chaos rift pulsed above the battlefield, growing larger with each passing minute. Asuka could feel it tugging at her thoughts, trying to find purchase in her mind. It whispered promises and voices that sounded like her mother, like Misato, like Shinji. It showed her visions of victory and belonging, of a world where she didn't have to prove herself every day, where people loved her without her having to earn it. She shut it out with the brutal efficiency of someone who'd spent years building walls around her heart. The rift could whisper all it wanted. She'd heard worse from her own thoughts during the long nights alone. Eva-02 caught a demon mid-leap and crushed it in the giant's remaining functional hand. The thing dissolved into smoke that smelled like burning sugar and rotten meat. Two more took its place, immediately giggling as they came. A new sound cut through the chaos of battle. Thunder that wasn't thunder, a roar of engines that made the very air vibrate. Asuka looked up through the smoke and saw them descending ships. Not the sleek Evangelion carriers she knew, but brutal slabs of metal large enough to carry armies. They were painted deep red, their hulls decorated with flames and hammers. One of them opened its deployment bay, and giants dropped from the sky. They wore armor the color of forge fire, green and orange, and red like metal in the process of being born. Each one stood twice the height of a man, broader than any human had the right to be. They hit the ground with impacts that cracked stone, and before the dust had settled, they were firing weapons that made the soldiers' rifles look like toys. Asuka watched one of them wade into a group of pink demons with a flamethrower that turned the air itself into a burning hell. The demons shrieked and dissolved, and this time they didn't reform. The giant didn't stop, didn't pause, just turned to find the next target with the mechanical efficiency of something that had done this 1,000 times before. More of them emerged from the smoke. They moved to surround Eva-02 weapons, tracking but not firing. Establishing a perimeter, one of them taller than the rest, his armor decorated with flames that seemed almost alive, raised a hand. The gesture was universal enough: stand down. Asuka's hands tightened on the controls. Eva-02 shifted stance, and the giant's remaining functional hand brought the progressive knife up in a guard position. The tall one tilted his head as if considering. Then he spoke, and his voice came through external speakers, deep and resonant and utterly inhuman. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. Not hostile, not friendly either. Cautious, measuring. The voice of someone deciding whether you were threat or asset. Eva-02's power reserves hit 35%. Warning klaxons sounded in the entry plug red lights, painting Asuka's face in the color of emergency. She had maybe 10 minutes of combat capability left. Maybe less if she had to maintain the AT field against another concentrated assault. The giants waited. The chaos rift pulsed overhead, hungry and patient. Somewhere in the ruins of the Titan Forge, more soldiers were regrouping, preparing for another assault. And Asuka sat in her entry plug alone and exhausted and so far from home that the distance felt like a physical weight. And tried to decide whether these new arrivals were saviors or just another kind of enemy. The tall giant lowered his weapon slightly. Not much. Just enough to suggest possibility. Asuka's finger hovered over the communications button. Every instinct screamed at her not to trust them, not to trust anyone in this red hell of a world. But she was running out of options, out of time, out of everything except the stubborn pride that kept her upright when logic said to fall. She pressed the button, spoke into a void that probably wouldn't understand her, in a language that probably didn't exist here. Her voice came out raw, exhausted, defiant. The giant's head tilted again. Listening. Processing. In the background, more ships descended, disgorging more warriors in red and green. They established firing lines, began driving back the demon incursion with a coordinated brutality that spoke of long practice. The tall one spoke again. Still that same measuring tone, still waiting for her response. Asuka closed her eyes, felt EVA-02's chest rise and fall in sync with her own breathing. Felt the synchronization pulling at her consciousness, trying to drag her down into the place where she and the giant were the same thing. Not yet, she told herself. Not yet. She opened her eyes and waited for the giants to make their move. The Chamber of Judgment stood at the heart of the Imperial Palace, a room so vast that its ceiling disappeared into shadow, even under the light of 1,000 candles. 12 thrones ringed the central dais, each occupied by a figure whose word could move fleets, whose signature could condemn worlds. The High Lords of Terra had not convened an emergency session for 3 years. The last time had been the fall of Cadia. This apparently warranted the same urgency. Lord Commander Militant Gaius Trevelyan spoke first, his voice amplified by Vox relays to fill the chamber. 4 hours ago, Mars reported an incursion, unidentified xenotech of unprecedented capability. Initial engagement resulted in the destruction of 3 Warhound-class Titans and significant casualties among Skitarii forces. The object is currently contained by elements of the Salamander's chapter, with Grey Knights en route. He paused, allowing the words to settle. Around the chamber, the other High Lords exchanged glances that suggested they'd already heard preliminary reports, already formed preliminary judgments. Master of the Administratum, Vern Halux, leaned forward, his augmetic eyes whirring as they focused. Define unidentified. We catalog every known xenoform across 10,000 years of records. What classification does Mars propose? Trevelyan gestured, and a hololith flickered to life above the central dais. The image was grainy, captured from battlefield auspex at extreme range, but clear enough. EVA-02 stood in profile, its crimson armor streaked with damage, one arm hanging useless. Even in 2 dimensions, even reduced to flickering light, the thing radiated wrongness. Too organic for a machine, too mechanical for a living creature. Human in shape, but divine in scale. Magos Dominus Kael Varin has designated it Titan-class organic construct. Trevelyan continued, piloted by a single human female approximately 14 standard years of age. Auspex readings confirm no warp taint in the pilot. No connection to known Xeno species. Technology base completely foreign to Imperial or Chaos paradigms. Silence fell across the chamber. It was Grand Provost Marshal Isadora Tem who broke it, her voice sharp with disbelief. A child. You're telling us a child piloted that thing through an engagement with the Legio Metallica and survived? Not merely survived, Trevelyan said quietly. The thing killed 3 Titans before Captain Galleon's forces established containment. Combat efficiency exceeds anything in our records for a single pilot system. Reaction time suggests neural interface far beyond our own Princeps connection protocols. Inquisitor Lord Varys Hale rose from his throne, his armor catching the candlelight in dull crimson gleams. He'd been silent until now, watching, listening, evaluating. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty that came from a lifetime of burning heretics. "This is clearly a chaos weapon," he said. "The timing of the demonic incursion confirms it. The warp responded to this thing's presence. That alone condemns it. Did it?" The question came from Ecclesiarch Deacon VII, whose domain was faith and whose mind was trained to find nuance where others saw only heresy. "The reports say the creature fought the demons as readily as it fought our forces. If it were truly of chaos, would it not ally with them?" "A deception," Hale said flatly. "Chaos is the father of lies. This is clearly a trap designed to—" "The Auspex readings show no warp signature," Trevelyan interrupted. "Master of the Astronomicon, can your psychers confirm?" The Master of the Astronomicon was an ancient thing, more machine than man, kept alive by technologies that predated the Imperium itself. When it spoke, its voice rasped like wind through a tomb. "Our astropaths report a soul. Human, female, young, but wrapped in something that defies proper categorization. It generates a field that repels warp intrusion without being of the warp itself. Brother Methodius describes it as a wall of absolute ego, a rejection of outside influence so complete that even the Imperium cannot find purchase." "That sounds like heresy to me," Hale muttered. "Or like the purest expression of human will," Deacon Seven countered. "Are we not taught that faith is the greatest armor against chaos? Perhaps this child has achieved through technology what we achieve through prayer." The argument might have continued, factions forming along familiar lines. But Trevelyan raised his hand for silence. "Philosophical debate can wait. We need immediate classification and response protocols. I propose designation RHO Omega. Xeno-human anomaly. Requires immediate study, extraction of pilot for questioning, and containment of the xenotech for analysis." Fabricator General Ud Audia Raskian spoke for the first time, his voice a synthetic approximation of human speech. "The Adeptus Mechanicus formally requests custody of both pilot and construct. This represents technology that could advance our understanding by centuries. The machine god has delivered this gift to Mars itself. Surely that is a sign of what Hale demanded. That we should study demon weapons in our forges. That we should allow xenofilth to corrupt our most sacred facilities. The thing is already on Mars," Raskian pointed out with machine logic. "Already within our forges. The question is not whether to study it, but who conducts the study and under what protocols." Lord Inquisitor Alexei Karamazov of the Ordo Xenos cleared his throat. The sound was polite, but it silenced the chamber as effectively as a gunshot. "If I may, we're approaching this from the wrong direction. The question isn't what this thing is. The question is where it came from." He gestured at the hololith, and the image shifted. No longer EVA-02, but the spatial readings from the moment of its arrival. Reality itself had split open a tear in the fabric of space that defied conventional understanding. Not a warp rift, not a webway portal. Something else entirely. Our augurs detected a moment of impossible geometry. Karamazov continued. Space folding in on itself in ways that violate every law we understand. The creature fell through from somewhere else. Somewhere that shouldn't exist according to our cosmology. Another dimension, Deacon Seven asked, fascinated despite himself. Or another time, Trevelyan suggested. There are legends of the dark age of technology producing miracles we can barely imagine. Perhaps this is one of them thrown forward through some catastrophe. Then we should welcome it, Raskyan said eagerly. Study it, learn from it, restore what was lost. Or destroy it before it destroys us, Hale countered. Unknown technology is indistinguishable from sorcery. Unknown origins suggest demon trickery. I move for immediate termination of both pilot and construct. The chamber erupted into argument. Voices overlapped each High Lord, pressing their position with the certainty of someone who commanded armies and whose word was law across entire sectors. The debate raged for 7 minutes before Trevelyan raised both hands, amplified vox cutting through the noise. Enough. We vote. Standard protocol for RHO Omega classification. 3 options: immediate termination, containment, and study or extraction and interrogation of pilot, followed by study of the construct. Lord Militant Gaius, please note the votes. The tally took another 3 minutes. When it concluded, the chamber fell silent once more. Containment and study, 4 votes. Extraction and interrogation, 6 votes. Immediate termination, 2 votes. Trevelyan nodded slowly. The majority has spoken. We extract the pilot. The Ordo Xenos will conduct the initial interrogation with Hereticus and Malleus observers present. The Mechanicus may examine the construct under armed guard. If at any point warp taint is detected, Protocol Sanctus Terminus is authorized. Total purge, no exceptions. Hale looked dissatisfied but nodded. When do we begin the extraction? Captain Gallion has established a perimeter, Trevelyan said. Grey Knights arrive in approximately 4 hours. I recommend we allow the Grey Knights to perform the psychic evaluation first. If they detect corruption, they have authorization to cleanse immediately. If not, we proceed with extraction. And if the pilot resists, Deacon the Seventh asked quietly, then we extract. Anyway, Trevelyan said flatly. This is not a negotiation. The pilot will cooperate or be sedated. The construct will be secured or destroyed. Those are the only options. The hololith flickered, updating with new battlefield data. EVA 02 had moved to a defensive position against the ruins of a collapsed cooling tower. Its remaining functional arm held a blade that Auspex identified as composed of vibrating monomolecular edge technology. The pilot had not attempted to break containment, but neither had she powered down her systems. She's waiting, Karamazov observed. Conserving power, evaluating her options. This suggests intelligence and training. Or instinct, Hale said darkly. Even animals know when they're cornered. Captain Gallion reports the pilot attempted communication, Trevelyan added. Gothic corrupted dialect but comprehensible. She identified herself by name and demanded to know what happened to her. She used a word our linguistic savants are still analyzing. Earth. She asked how to get back to Earth. We are on Earth, Deacon Seven said, confused. Perhaps she means a different Earth, Karamazov suggested. A parallel world, if such things exist. Or perhaps it's a code word, a designation for wherever she came from. The chaos rift over Mars pulsed in the hololith display, hungry and patient. Demon incursions continued despite the salamander's best efforts. Whatever the construct was, its presence was drawing chaos like blood drew sharks. Time is not on our side, Trevelyan said. Every minute we delay gives the ruinous powers more opportunity to corrupt the situation. I'm authorizing Protocol Black Sky. Full extraction team maximum force authorization. Captain Gallion is to maintain containment until Grey Knights arrive. Once psychic evaluation is complete, we move immediately. And if she fights, Raskian asked, then we make it very clear that she has no choice. Trevelyan said quietly. We are the Imperium of man. We have fought for 10,000 years against horrors that would break mortal minds. One child in a Xeno-Titan, however powerful, will not dictate terms to us. The High Lords rose from their thrones. The session concluded. Orders went out across the Astronomicon, traveling at the speed of thought through the warp. Ships adjusted their courses. Regiments prepared for deployment. In the depths of Titan, the Grey Knight's fortress monastery, Brother Captain Anselm received his orders and began the rituals of psychic preparation. On Mars, Captain Tiber Gallion watched the Crimson Giant through his helmet's auto-senses and wondered if they were making a terrible mistake. The thing had saved itself against impossible odds. It had fought with a desperation that spoke of survival instinct, not malice. The pilot's voice over the Vox had sounded young, frightened human, but orders were orders. And the Imperium did not survive 10,000 years by showing mercy to anomalies. He opened a Vox channel to his command squad. Prepare for extraction operations. Grey Knights inbound in 3 hours. Until then, maintain perimeter. No one approaches the construct. No one. His brothers acknowledged their voices calm, with the tranquility of warriors who had seen worse. But Gallion couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to cross a line from which there was no return. Inside the entry plug, Asuka felt EVA-02's power reserves tick down to 30%. She'd been sitting in defensive posture for over an hour now, watching the giants in red armor watch her. They hadn't attacked, hadn't advanced, just waited with inhuman patience. She didn't know what they were waiting for, but every instinct screamed that it was nothing good. Her hand rested on the controls, ready. Her heart hammered in her chest, adrenaline from the earlier battle still singing through her veins. Whatever was coming, she'd face it the only way she knew how. On her feet, fighting, always fighting. The Grey Knights arrived in silence. No thunder of drop pods, no roar of engines to announce their coming. One moment the Martian sky was empty, save for the purple wound of the Chaos Rift. The next, reality folded in on itself, and they were simply there. 12 figures in silver armor that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. Psychic wards covered every surface of their plate inscriptions in a language older than the Imperium words of power that made the air itself uncomfortable to breathe. Brother Captain Anselm stood at their center, taller than his brothers, his armor decorated with purity seals that fluttered in a wind that existed only in the warp. His force halberd hummed with barely contained energy, psychic lightning crawling along its blade in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Captain Gallion met them at the perimeter, his own armor seeming crude and brutal next to their refined craftsmanship. The salamander removed his helmet in a gesture of respect, Brother Captain. Your arrival is timely. Anselm's helmet turned toward EVA-02, and though his face was hidden behind silver ceramite, Gallion could feel the weight of his scrutiny. The construct radiates wrongness, the Grey Knight said, his voice resonant with psychic harmonics. But it is not chaos. That much I can confirm from here. The High Lords will be relieved to hear it, Gallion said carefully. Will they? Anselm tilted his head. I said it is not chaos. I did not say it is safe. The pilot's soul is visible to my witch sight like a star against darkness. Human, yes, but wrapped in something that refuses the warp's touch so absolutely that it creates a void in reality. Such absolute rejection is almost as dangerous as acceptance. The High Lords have ordered extraction, Gallion said. Your evaluation was requested, but the decision has been made. Then, let us proceed, Anselm said. But I warn you, Captain, that thing will not surrender willingly. I have walked the nightmares of demons and stared into the eyes of chaos sorcerers. I know the taste of a soul that will break before it bends. This pilot has that quality. You suggest we reconsider. I suggest we prepare for violence. Inside the entry pod. Plug. Asuka watched the new arrivals with growing dread. These were different from the red giants. Something about them made her skin crawl, made the synchronization interface flutter with static warnings. EVA-02 itself seemed to recoil from their presence, the giant's nervous system registering them as fundamentally wrong. Power reserves at 28%. The number blinked accusingly on her display. Not enough for sustained combat. Barely enough for another 10 minutes of active operation. She'd been rationing every movement, every gesture, trying to conserve what little remained. The silver giants moved toward her in formation, spreading out to encircle EVA-02's position. Their movements were precise, coordinated with a unity that spoke of psychic communication. No shouted orders, no hand signals. Just perfect synchronization. Asuka's hands tightened on the controls. The progressive knife was still deployed, though its edge was ruined from the earlier battle. Against these new enemies, it might be useless. But it was all she had. One of them raised a hand, and Asuka felt something press against her mind. Not a voice. Not quite. More like pressure, like someone trying to force open a door that had been locked from the inside. It pushed at her thoughts with gentle insistence, testing, probing, searching for weakness. She pushed back with everything she had. The AT field flared to life around EVA-02, hexagonal panels of light snapping into existence with a sound like breaking glass. The psychic pressure hit the field and stopped, unable to penetrate that fundamental rejection of outside influence. The silver giant tilted its head, considering. Then it pushed harder. Pain exploded behind Asuka's eyes. Not physical pain, nothing so simple. This was the agony of having your mind itself squeezed in a vice of thoughts being compressed and examined and judged. She screamed, and the sound filled the entry plug, echoing off the LCL-stained walls. The AT field held. Barely. She could feel it straining, feel the psychic assault battering against that wall of absolute ego, like waves against a cliff. But it held. Through the viewport, she saw the other giants taking position. They were doing something, preparing something. Massive machines were being brought forward from the ruins of the Titan Forge, carried by things that were more crane than creature. Industrial equipment designed for working with Titans, for working on Titans. Asuka's breath came in ragged gasps. They were going to try to open EVA-02. Try to cut her out like a tumor. The realization brought a terror so absolute that for a moment her hands froze on the controls. No, they can't. I won't let them. The first of the machines locked onto EVA-02's shoulder pylon with a clang that resonated through the giant's frame. Asuka felt it like shackles closing around her own wrist. She tried to move the arm, but magnetic clamps had engaged, holding the limb in place with impossible strength. Another machine approached from behind this one, trailing cables thick as her torso. Mechadendrites, though she had no name for them. They moved with horrible grace, seeking purchase points on EVA-02's armor, looking for gaps, looking for ways inside. EVA-02 thrashed, trying to break free. The movement cost precious power, but Asuka couldn't stop herself. Pure animal panic took over every instinct, screaming at her to run, to fight, to do anything except sit still, while they violated her giant's body. More clamps engaged. More cables attached. The machines were working in concert, now coordinated by the mechanical soldiers she'd fought earlier. They knew what they were doing. This was a practiced operation refined over centuries of working with their own giant war machines. Through it all, the psychic pressure continued. The silver giant maintained his assault on her mind, not trying to break through the AT field, but to wear it down through attrition. Asuka felt her concentration slipping, felt the edges of her thoughts beginning to fray. One of the mechadendrites found what it was looking for. A gap in the armor plating near EVA-02's spine, right above where the entry plug interfaced with the giant's nervous system. The mechanical tendril slithered inside with the precision of a surgeon. and Asuka felt it like a violation, like something crawling under her own skin. She wanted to vomit. The LCL around her churned with her distress, the fluid responding to her elevated heart rate and stress hormones. Warning lights painted everything red. Power at 25%, 24, 23. A new sound cut through the chaos. High-pitched and sustained a whine that grew in intensity until it became physically painful. Asuka looked through the viewport and saw them bringing forward a weapon she recognized, a melta-cutter. Industrial grade, designed to slice through the heaviest armor plating with beams of superheated matter. They were going to cut open EVA-02's back. Going to carve through the armor like surgeons opening a patient. And then they'd reach the entry plug, and they'd pull her out, and she'd be helpless in their hands. The thought broke something inside her. Not her will, but her restraint. The part of her that had been holding back, afraid to push the synchronization too far, afraid of what might happen if she let go completely. That fear evaporated in the face of a greater terror. The synchronization rate spiked. Numbers scrolled across her display faster than she could track them. 60%, 70, 80. Warning klaxons screamed at her to pull back to reduce neural connection before permanent damage occurred. She ignored them. EVA-02 responded like a beast waking from drugged sleep. The giant's remaining functional arm tore free from its restraints with a shriek of tortured metal. The progressive knife, dull and damaged as it was still, had enough edge to matter. Asuka drove it into the nearest clamp mechanism, felt the satisfying crunch of vital components shattering. The silver giants reacted immediately. Their leader's psychic assault doubled in intensity, and this time Asuka felt it differently. Not pressure from outside, but hooks sinking into her thoughts, trying to drag them into the open. Trying to expose every fear, every doubt, every weakness she'd spent years hiding behind walls of pride and anger. She saw her mother. Not the memory she kept locked away, but the moment itself fresh and terrible. The hospital room. The rope. The chair kicked away. Her mother's face slack and empty, seeing something that wasn't there. Seeing someone that wasn't Asuka. Not real, it's not real. Just psychic attack, just manipulation. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. The synchronization rate climbed to 90%. And at that threshold, the line between Asuka and EVA-02 began to blur. She felt the giant's pain as her own. Felt the mechadendrites worming through armor gaps like parasites burrowing into flesh. Felt the melta-cutter's heat even before it activated, anticipation and dread making it real. Another memory surfaced, dragged up by psychic assault. The day she'd lost synchronization in front of everyone. The day Shinji had surpassed her scores. The shame of it, the humiliation, the sick certainty that she was being replaced. That she'd never been special at all. That everything she'd built her identity on was a lie. 95% synchronization. The entry plug's systems were screaming now, automated safety protocols trying to shut down the connection before it killed her. But Asuka had overridden those protocols long ago, modified the interface in ways the technicians didn't know about. She could push further than anyone else because she'd removed the safeguards that kept others alive. She'd always known it might kill her eventually. She'd never cared. The melta-cutter activated. Superheated plasma lanced out, and Asuka screamed as she felt it cutting into EVA-02's back. Not her back. The giant's back. But at 95% synchronization, the distinction was academic. Pain signals flooded her nervous system, threatening to shut down conscious thought entirely. Through the agony, she saw more memories. Not hers this time. The psychic assault was digging deeper, finding things she'd buried so far down she'd forgotten they existed. The loneliness of genius recognized too young and pushed too hard. The desperate need for approval from adults who saw her as a weapon first and a child second. The bone-deep certainty that love was something you earned through performance, not something freely given. The knowledge that she was utterly, completely alone. 100% synchronization, the threshold she'd never crossed. The point where Pilot and Evangelion became truly one, where the boundary of self dissolved entirely. Eva 02's core pulsed with light. Not the steady glow of normal operation, but something brighter, more intense. The giant's remaining eye blazed crimson, and for a moment Asuka felt something else in the synchronization. A presence. Familiar and foreign at once. "Mom," the whisper came from somewhere deeper than thought. Not a voice. Not even a presence, really. Just a sense of something watching, something that had always been watching. The soul that resided in EVA-02's core, the piece of her mother that had been trapped in this thing since the day of the contact experiment. You can save yourself, the presence seemed to say. But the price is everything. Asuka didn't understand. Didn't have time to understand. The melta-cutter was carving deeper mechadendrites were reaching for the entry plug interface, and the psychic assault showed her a final vision herself, broken and discarded. Another failed pilot in a war she'd never understood. No, the word came from somewhere primal. Somewhere that refused to accept defeat, even when logic said it was inevitable. No, I won't break, I won't fail, I won't let them win. The AT field exploded outward with force that sent the silver giant staggering back. Not just a defensive barrier anymore, but an expression of pure will made manifest. The field expanded in pulses, each one wider than the last, shoving away everything that tried to touch EVA-02. The machines shattered. The clamps broke. The mechadendrites were torn free with sparks and trailing oil. Even the psychic assault faltered, unable to maintain focus against that tsunami of absolute rejection. EVA-02 stood, and the movement was wrong. Too smooth. Too fluid. The giant moved like something alive rather than piloted its damaged systems, compensating through means that had nothing to do with engineering. Beast mode, though Asuka had no name for it yet. The state where the resident soul took partial control, augmenting the pilot's will with its own. The boundary between Asuka and her mother's ghost blurred completely, and for a few precious seconds they were one being with one purpose: survive. The progressive knife lashed out with speed that made the earlier combat look sluggish. It caught a silver giant across the chest plate, and psychic wards flared and died under the impact. The giant staggered, and his brothers moved to support him, their formation tightening. But they were too slow. EVA-02 was already moving, powered by something beyond electricity and muscle. The giant's fist crashed into a warhound titan that had been approaching from the flank, and the impact sent the war machine toppling like a kicked toy. Asuka's vision swam. Blood ran from her nose, from her ears, from the corners of her eyes. 100% synchronization was killing her by degrees, burning through her nervous system like acid. She could feel her heart straining, beating too fast, pushed beyond safe limits by adrenaline and terror. But she couldn't stop. Stopping meant capture. Capture meant being cut apart, examined, destroyed. Better to burn out fighting than to surrender. EVA-02 took a step forward toward the perimeter, toward escape. Power reserves hit 20%, 19, 18. Every movement cost more than the last, the giant systems failing one by one under the strain of beast mode operation. The chaos rift pulsed overhead, drawn by the psychic turmoil. Demons began to pour through in greater numbers, sensing opportunity in the chaos. The silver giants turned to face this new threat, their priorities shifting. Better to contain chaos than to capture one rogue pilot. Asuka saw the opening, saw the gap in their lines, where attention had shifted elsewhere. EVA-02 lunged for it with the last of its strength, and for a moment, she thought they might make it. Might actually escape this red hell and find a way home. Then, reality asserted itself. The giant's damaged leg gave out mid-stride servo muscles, shredded beyond function. EVA-02 crashed to its knees with impact that rattled Asuka's teeth. Power reserves hit 15%, 14. The giant tried to rise and failed, damaged systems refusing to respond. The silver giants turned back their threat assessment complete. The demons were being driven back by the red giants and their flamethrowers. The immediate chaos threat was contained, which meant attention could return to the original target. Brother Captain Anselm approached Evangelion slowly, his force halberd held ready. Around him, his brothers formed a circle of silver and psychic light. There would be no escape this time, no last-minute surge of strength, just the inevitable conclusion of a battle that had been lost from the beginning. Asuka slumped in her seat, consciousness flickering. The synchronization rate had dropped to 80%, her body's safety mechanisms finally overriding her will. She could barely see through the blood and tears, could barely think through the exhaustion that dragged at her thoughts like weights. They'd won. The realization brought a despair so complete that for a moment she wanted to just let go. Just slip away into unconsciousness and let someone else deal with it. But even now, even broken and defeated, her pride wouldn't allow surrender. Her hand found the controls one last time. EVA-02's head lifted the giant's remaining eye, focusing on Anselm, with whatever defiance Asuka had left to give. The Grey Knight stopped just outside at field range. His psychic presence pressed against her mind one more time. But gently now. Not an attack. An examination. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of something that might have been respect. You fought well, child. But this ends now. Surrender and you will not be harmed. Resist and we will extract you by force. The choice is yours. Asuka's lips moved, forming words in a language he couldn't understand. But the meaning was clear enough in her tone, in the set of her jaw, in the way her hand stayed on the controls, even as her strength failed. She would never surrender. Not to them, not to anyone, not ever. They came from all sides at once. Asuka's vision swam in and out of focus. The entry plug's displays flickering with damage warnings, she no longer had the energy to read. EVA-02 knelt in the Martian dust, its remaining functional systems struggling to maintain even basic operation. Power reserves at 12%. The number blinked like an accusation, like a countdown to inevitable failure. The Mechanicus forces had repositioned during her failed escape attempt. Now they formed a tightening noose around EVA-02's position, their war machines advancing with the patience of things that understood siegecraft. Warhound Titans stalked forward on legs that shook the ground with each step. Skitarii cohorts moved between them, their weapons tracking EVA-02's slumped form with mechanical precision. From the opposite flank, the salamanders maintained their perimeter. Captain Galleon's forces had taken casualties during the demon incursion, but their formation remained solid. They advanced more slowly than the Mechanicus forces, their movements suggesting containment rather than assault. They didn't want to destroy EVA-02. They wanted to take it intact. The Grey Knights held position in a loose circle, their psychic presence pressing against Asuka's mind like a sustained headache. Brother Captain Anselm stood at their center, his force halberd planted in the ground like a banner. Waiting, watching, his witch sight piercing through armor and metal to examine the soul cowering within. And above them, all the chaos rift pulsed with obscene life. It had grown larger in the hours since Asuka's arrival. The Terran reality now stretched across a quarter of the Martian sky. Purple and writhing, bleeding colors that shouldn't exist into the red atmosphere. Things moved within it, shapes that hurt to perceive directly. Not the lesser demons that had harried the earlier battle, but something worse. Something patient. Asuka felt their attention like insects crawling across her skin. The rift was aware of her in a way that transcended normal perception. It knew her. Recognized something in her soul that drew it like sharks to blood. She tried to raise EVA-02's arm and felt the servos grind, protesting. The giant's remaining functional limb moved with agonizing slowness, lifted the ruined progressive knife in a gesture that was more defiant than threatening. There was no strength left for actual combat. Barely enough for the appearance of resistance. Magos Dominus Kyle Varen's voice crackled across the Vox channels, speaking in that flat mechanical tone that treated human life as just another variable in his calculations. Subject demonstrates continued hostility. Recommend immediate application of restraint protocols. Commence extraction. The machines moved forward. Massive industrial constructs rolled across the Martian surface on tracks that left gouges in the stone. Lifting cranes and cutting equipment tools designed for working on Titans, now repurposed for this singular extraction. They carried between them a cage of pure force, a containment field powered by generators the size of buildings. Asuka watched them approach and felt something inside her chest twist with despair, so absolute it took her breath away. This was it. The end of resistance. They would cage EVA-02, cut through its armor, pull her from the entry plug like a parasite from flesh. And then what interrogation, execution, vivisection to understand how her synchronization worked. She'd seen what these people did to enemies. The bodies of the pink demons still littered the battlefield, burned to ash by flamers dissolved into component particles by weapons she had no names for. They showed no mercy to chaos. Why would they show mercy to her? Her hand trembled on the controls. Not from fear alone, though fear was there in abundance, but from exhaustion. From the bone-deep weariness of fighting too hard for too long with no hope of victory. She'd given everything. Pushed synchronization to limits that would probably kill her even if she survived the next hour. And it still wasn't enough. It was never enough. The first restraint field activated with a sound like breaking glass. Purple light enfolded EVA-02's legs, locking the giant in place with force that made the armor groan. Asuka tried to break free and felt the field tighten in response, adaptive systems compensating for her resistance. More fields activated, one around each arm, one circling the torso. Within seconds, EVA-02 was completely immobilized, held upright by forces that cared nothing for the giant's struggles. The melta-cutters advanced again. This time, there would be no escape. No last-minute surge of strength. Just the slow, methodical dissection of her giant, followed by her own extraction, and whatever fate these people had planned. That was when the Chaos Rift spoke. It didn't use words. Nothing so crude as language. Instead, it pushed visions directly into Asuka's mind, bypassing her defenses, while the psychic assault from the Grey Knights had worn them down to nothing. She saw herself through eyes that weren't her own, saw her soul laid bare and exposed. Such pain, the visions whispered, such loneliness. No one understands you. No one ever has. Asuka tried to shut it out, but at 12% power and 80% synchronization, her mental defenses were tissue paper. The visions came faster, more vivid. Memories she'd buried surfacing like corpses from deep water. Her mother's hospital room. The smell of antiseptic and flowers dying in cheap vases. The way her mother had looked through her rather than at her, seeing someone else. Someone who wasn't there. Someone who would never be there again, because that someone was trapped inside EVA-02's core, leaving behind only a hollow shell that wore her mother's face. You were never enough for her, the rift whispered. Never good enough. Never the right child. The vision shifted. Now she was in the test chamber, synchronization scores displayed for everyone to see. Shinji's numbers climbing past hers. The technicians murmured conversations that they thought she couldn't hear. Concerns about her psychological stability. Suggestions that perhaps Unit 01 should be the primary deployment unit going forward. They're replacing you. You know that, don't you? All your skill, all your training, and they still prefer the boy who doesn't even want to be here. Asuka's hands clenched on the controls, hard enough to hurt. The LCL around her churned, with her distress bubbles rising from her gasping breaths. The visions weren't real, weren't happening now. But they felt real, and at this depth of synchronization, feeling was enough. The rift showed her Misato's face concern, masked as professional distance. Showed her Shinji backing away whenever she got too close, too intense, too much. Showed her every time she'd reached out for connection and found only empty air. "You're alone," the rift crooned. "You've always been alone. Even in a room full of people, you stand apart. Different, lesser, unwanted." Something broke inside her chest. Not her will to fight, but something deeper. The walls she'd built around her heart to protect herself from exactly this kind of pain. They crumbled, and behind them was a 14-year-old girl who'd spent her entire life proving she was worth loving, and still couldn't quite believe it was true. Eva 02 sagged in its restraints. The giant's eye dimmed, its core temperature dropping, as Asuka's will to resist faltered. Around them, the assembled forces of the Imperium pressed closer, sensing victory. The Chaos Rift pulsed with satisfaction and showed her one final vision. She saw herself older, still fighting, still proving herself, still alone. Saw a lifetime of victories that meant nothing because there was no one left to share them with. Saw herself becoming exactly what everyone feared: a weapon without humanity, a soldier without connection, a pilot who'd forgotten how to be anything except excellent and empty. "Is this what you want?" the rift asked. "An eternity of struggle with no reward? We could give you peace. We could make the pain stop. All you have to do is let go." And for one terrible moment, Asuka wanted to. Wanted to just surrender, stop fighting, let the universe do whatever it wanted with her broken body. What was the point of resistance? What was the point of anything? When you were this alone, this exhausted, this certain that even victory would taste like ash. Power reserves hit 10%. EVA-02 systems began cascading failure protocols. The giant's remaining functional systems shut down one by one, preserving core integrity at the expense of everything else. Soon there would be nothing left, just a dead machine and a pilot too broken to care. The melta-cutters reached EVA-02's back. Plasma began to cut through armor, carving through restraints and ablative plating with surgical precision. Asuka felt it like knives in her own spine, the synchronization translating damage into phantom agony. She should fight back, should do something. But the rift's whispers had drained her of the will to resist. "You're nothing," it told her. "You've always been nothing. Your mother knew it. That's why she left you." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Asuka's vision blurred with tears that mixed with the LCL, making everything swim. Her chest hitched with sobs. She refused to release throat closing around screams she wouldn't give voice to. Even now, even broken, her pride demanded she suffer in silence. The Grey Knights pressed their psychic assault with renewed vigor, sensing her defenses collapsing. They battered at her mind not to destroy, but to examine, to categorize, to determine if she was worth saving or better destroyed. Their presence felt like hands rifling through her memories, touching things that were private, sacred, hers alone. She had nothing left to stop them with. "This is it," she thought distantly. "This is where I die." Not in glorious combat, but broken and alone, cut apart by people who don't even see me as human. The melta-cutter burned deeper. Smoke rose from EVA-02's violated armor. In seconds, they'd reach the entry plug interface, and then it would all be over. Asuka closed her eyes and waited for the end, and felt something shift in the darkness behind her thoughts. Not the rift, not the psychic assault. Something else. Something that had been there all along, waiting, watching. A presence she'd felt 1,000 times during synchronization, but never quite acknowledged. The soul that resided in EVA-02's core. The piece of her mother that had been trapped here since the contact experiment. The presence didn't speak. Couldn't speak, not in any conventional sense. But Asuka felt it anyway, a sensation that bypassed language entirely and communicated meaning directly to her heart. "You are not alone," it told her. "You have never been alone. I have always been here." Asuka's eyes snapped open. Through the LCL and the tears and the blood running from her nose, she saw EVA-02's core pulsing with light. Not the dim glow of normal operation, but something brighter, something alive. The presence pressed against her consciousness, not invading, but offering. Not taking control, but sharing strength. And for the first time in her life, Asuka understood what synchronization truly meant. Not just connecting to a machine, but connecting to the soul within it. The soul that had loved her before she was born. The soul that loved her still. "Mom," she whispered into the LCL. The core blazed brighter, and deep in her chest, beneath the despair and the exhaustion and the fear, something stirred. Not hope exactly. She didn't dare hope. But something smaller and more fundamental. The same stubborn pride that had kept her upright through a lifetime of proving herself. The same furious refusal to break that had defined every choice she'd ever made. They wanted her to give up. To surrender, to admit defeat. The thought alone was enough to kindle rage in her chest. Pure, bright, incandescent fury at a universe that kept demanding she prove her worth. At gods and demons and empires that thought they could decide her fate without her consent. No. The word echoed through the synchronization, amplified by her mother's presence, given weight by 14 years of never backing down. No. I won't break. I won't surrender. I won't let them win. EVA-02's core pulsed once more. This time, the light didn't fade. Around them, the forces of the Imperium pressed closer, weapons, ready containment fields at maximum strength. The chaos rift writhed overhead, hungry and patient. The melta-cutter carved deeper into EVA-02's armor, seconds from breaching the entry plug chamber. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Because Asuka Langley Soryu remembered who she was. And she decided with absolute certainty that she was going home. The change began in the space between heartbeats. Asuka felt it first as a warmth spreading through her chest, radiating outward from the synchronization interface like sunlight through ice. Not physical heat, though her body registered it that way. Something deeper. The sensation of walls she'd spent 14 years building suddenly becoming irrelevant, dissolving not through force, but through simple recognition that they'd never been necessary. She was Asuka Langley Soryu, pilot of Evangelion Unit 02, daughter of Kyoko Zeppelin Soryu, and she was not alone. The presence in EVA-02's core surged forward, no longer content to watch from the shadows of her consciousness. Her mother's soul fractured and incomplete as it was pressed against Asuka's awareness with an urgency that transcended language. Not taking control, not overwhelming her will. Just being there, solid and real and undeniable. The synchronization rate should have been dropping. She'd pushed too hard, burned too bright, exhausted every reserve. By all metrics, EVA-02 should be shutting down. Her nervous system should be collapsing, and her consciousness should be fragmenting into shock. Instead, the numbers climbed. 105%, 110, The interface systems screamed warnings that no longer mattered. Safety protocols tripping over each other, trying to shut down a connection that had moved beyond their ability to regulate. The AT field around EVA-02 had been flickering weak and inconsistent, barely holding back the Imperium's assault. Now, it stabilized. Not growing stronger in raw power, but becoming more focused, more absolute. The hexagonal panels of light solidified into something that looked less like energy and more like certainty made visible. "This is my boundary," the field declared. "This is where I end, and everything else begins. You cannot cross this line, because I do not permit it." Brother Captain Anselm felt it first among the Imperial forces. His witch sight, trained through decades of hunting demons and reading the tides of the warp, suddenly registered something that shouldn't exist. The girl's soul had been visible to him before, as a tight knot of pain and pride wrapped in defenses that rejected outside influence. Now it blazed like a star, not with power, but with definition. An ego so precisely delineated that reality itself had to acknowledge its boundaries. He raised his hand, signaling his brothers to pull back. Something was happening. Something that defied his understanding of how souls and machines interfaced. The Evangelion's core was resonating with the pilot's consciousness in a pattern that suggested not just synchronization, but fusion. Two souls overlapping without merging, occupying the same space while remaining distinct. Impossible, his training said. The warp didn't work that way. Souls either remained separate or dissolved into each other. There was no middle ground. But this wasn't the warp. This was something else entirely. The AT field pulsed, and space around EVA-02 rippled like water disturbed by a stone. Not bending exactly. More like reality taking a step back, giving the field room to exist. Anselm's psychic senses registered the effect as a void, an absence of anything he could read or influence. The girl had wrapped herself in absolute rejection, and his powers simply slid off the surface like rain off glass. Magos Dominus Kael Varen's sensors went haywire. The melta-cutter that had been carving through EVA-02's armor suddenly stopped cutting its plasma beam, scattering off the AT field like light through a prism. The containment fields that had immobilized the giant's limbs began to fail, not overwhelmed, but simply negated. The Evangelion was rejecting the very concept of restraint, and his technology had no response to that level of metaphysical rebellion. He issued commands through his neural interface, demanding more power. Stronger fields, alternative approaches. His machines responded with error codes he had never seen before. The target was no longer registering as matter in the conventional sense. It existed, certainly. It occupied space. But it refused to interact with anything that tried to affect it without permission. In the entry-plug, Asuka felt EVA-02 moving, and the movement was effortless. The giant's damaged systems repaired themselves through means that had nothing to do with engineering. Severed servo muscles reconnected. Cracked armor plates sealed. The progressive knife, dull and notched from hours of combat, gleamed with renewed edge. Power reserves climbed. 15%, 20, 25. The internal battery was exhausted, but energy was coming from somewhere else. From the core. From the synchronization itself. From the resonance between her will and her mother's presence. She stood, and EVA-02 rose with her shedding restraint fields and cutting equipment like water. The giant's eye blazed crimson, brighter than before, lit from within by something that was neither electricity nor soul, but somehow both. The chaos rift above them reacted like a living thing struck. Its whispers, which had been growing in volume and insistence, suddenly cut off. The diamonds that had been circling at its edges retreated into the purple depths, driven back by something they sensed but couldn't name. The rift pulsed, trying to find purchase in Asuka's mind again. But the AT field rejected it absolutely. You have no power here. Asuka's thoughts rang out with bell-like clarity. I am myself. You cannot change that. And for the first time since arriving on Mars, she felt certainty settle into her chest. Not hope which could be disappointed, not confidence which could be shaken. Just the simple, unshakable knowledge of who she was. She was Asuka Langley Soryu, and she was going home. The thought crystallized in her mind with such force that it became intention, became will. And the AT field responded, resonating at a frequency that made the air itself vibrate. High above Mars, where the chaos rift bled purple poison into reality, another wound began to open. This one was different. Not torn and ragged like the rift, but precise, geometric. A perfect circle of light the color of Earth's sun, yellow-orange and warm. It opened like an eye, widening incrementally, revealing nothing beyond its threshold except more light. Anselm recognized it immediately, though he'd never seen anything like it before. A gateway. Not through the warp, not through any dimension his order had cataloged. Just a door that led somewhere else, opened through means that bypassed every law he understood about how space and reality functioned. The girl was calling it, willing it into existence through the sheer force of her need to leave. And somehow, impossibly, reality was answering. Brother Methodius, still locked in his suspension cradle systems, away on Mars's orbital station, felt the phenomenon through his connection to the Astronomicon. 2 points in space folding together, drawn into alignment by a force that wasn't the warp, but affected space-time nonetheless. He screamed another warning across the psychic relay network, but this time, the message wasn't danger, it was wonder. Inside the entry, plug, Asuka felt the connection forming. Felt space itself remembering the wound that had brought her here, the tear the angel Harkiel had created when it pulled EVA-02 through dimensions. That wound had never fully healed. It had been waiting dormant, held open by the faintest thread of connection to the place she'd left behind. Her Atfield found that thread and pulled. The spatial scar above Mars widened, and through it Asuka could see impossible things. The Geofront's white walls. The LCL pools where EVA units rested between deployments. Technicians frozen mid-motion, still reacting to her disappearance. No time had passed there. Or all the time had passed. Or time itself had become negotiable in the space between dimensions. It didn't matter. It was home. It was where she belonged. And it was calling her back. EVA-02 took a step toward the light, and every force arrayed on Mars moved to stop it. The Mechanicus unleashed everything they had. Plasma cannons that could melt through fortress walls. Lass weaponry in concentrated streams, bright enough to blind. Missiles that carried warheads designed to crack bunkers open like eggs. All of it converged on EVA-02's position in a firestorm that would have vaporized a city block. The AT field caught it all and held, not deflecting, not absorbing, simply refusing to let the attacks matter. They hit the hexagonal panels of light and stopped energy dissipating into harmless light and heat. Asuka felt the impacts like rain on a window, distant and inconsequential. The salamanders opened fire with more restraint, their bolters and flamers targeting EVA-02's legs, trying to cripple rather than kill. Captain Galleon's orders had been clear: contain if possible, destroy if necessary. But his shots met the same fate as the Mechanicus barrage. The AT field was absolute. Only the Grey Knights held back. Anselm watched the gateway forming above and made a decision that would haunt him for years afterward. He could feel the psychic weight of that portal, could sense the immense forces required to hold it open. If they attacked now, tried to disrupt the girl's concentration, they might succeed in closing it. But they might also trap her here permanently, strand her in a dimension that wasn't her own, in a time that wasn't her time. And something in Anselm's soul, trained though it was, to destroy anything tainted or alien, balked at that cruelty. She was a child, lost and terrified and fighting for her life. Yes, she wielded power that could threaten the Imperium. Yes, her technology defied their understanding. But she wasn't chaos, wasn't malevolent, just desperate. He lowered his force halberd and spoke into the Vox channel that connected him to the other Imperial commanders. "Stand down. Let her go." Magos Kael Varen's response was immediate and furious. "We cannot allow such technology to escape our grasp. This represents knowledge that could. It represents a child trying to go home." Anselm interrupted, his voice carrying psychic weight that made the Vox crackle. "We are warriors of the Imperium. We fight to protect humanity, not to cage it. Stand down." For a long moment, no one moved. The Mechanicus forces held their firing solutions. The salamanders maintained their aim, but didn't pull triggers. Above them, the spatial gateway continued to widen, bleeding light that tasted like hope and distance. Eva-02 took another step toward it, then another. The giant moved with purpose, now no longer fighting, but simply walking, leaving. The AT field pulsed with each step, maintaining its absolute barrier against a world that had tried to destroy what it couldn't understand. Asuka felt tears streaming down her face, mixing with the LCL that filled the entry plug. Not from sadness, not from relief, from the simple, overwhelming emotion of knowing that this nightmare was ending. That she'd survived. That despite everything this red hell had thrown at her, she was still herself. The Chaos Rift made one final attempt to claim her. Demons poured from its depths in numbers that darkened the sky, driven by their patron's fury at watching a soul escape its grasp. They swarmed toward Eva-02 in a tide of corrupted flesh and screaming madness. The AT field expanded, not gradually, not with effort, just suddenly, absolutely filling the space around EVA-02 with hexagonal panels that locked together like a wall of light. The demons hit it and dissolved their essence, scattered back into the warp without even the dignity of destruction. Just negation. Just rejection so complete that they ceased to matter. The rift writhed, trying to follow EVA-02 through the gateway, trying to infect whatever dimension lay beyond. But Asuka's will had become iron. Her definition of self had become absolute. And the AT field reflected that absoluteness, creating a barrier that even chaos couldn't cross. The spatial gateway was fully open now, a circle of light 30 meters across, hanging in the Martian sky like a second sun. Through it, Asuka could see the Geo front clearly. Could see Misato's face frozen in the moment of her disappearance, mouth open in a shout that hadn't yet been completed. Could see Shinji pressing his hands against an observation window, his expression caught between horror and disbelief. Home, right there, close enough to touch. Eva-02 crouched servos, gathering power for one final movement. The giant's remaining functional systems aligned perfectly, all strength-focused toward a single purpose. Asuka's hands moved on the controls, her mother's presence steady in the synchronization, lending strength without taking control. Together they jumped. Eva-02 launched upward with force that cracked the Martian bedrock beneath its feet. The giant soared through the red sky, trailing fire and spent armor plating rising toward the light with desperate velocity. The AT field contracted around them, pulling in tight to create a shell that could survive the transition between dimensions. The forces of the Imperium watched in silence as the crimson giant reached the gateway and dove through. There was no flash of light, no dramatic explosion. One moment, Eva-02 was there, silhouetted against Mars' red sky. The next, it was gone, swallowed by brilliance that closed behind it like a healing wound. The spatial gateway collapsed. Reality sealed itself, space-time, correcting the anomaly with the efficiency of immune system destroying foreign cells. Within seconds, there was no trace that the portal had ever existed. Just Martian sky, red and empty and unchanged. The chaos rift denied its prize, began to shrink. Without the focus of Asuka's unique soul to anchor it, the tear in reality lost coherence. Demons retreated into its depths, their purpose frustrated. Within the hour, it would close completely, leaving behind only radiation and the lingering taint of warp exposure. Brother Captain Anselm stood in the silence that followed his witch sight, still tracking the fading resonance of the girl's passage. He'd seen many things in his service to the Emperor, walked through demonic realms, and stared into the eyes of chaos sorcerers, watched worlds burn and heroes fall. But he'd never seen anything quite like that. A child. Just a child. With power enough to defy the Imperium and chaos both. Not through strength, but through the simple absolute conviction of who she was. He turned to find Captain Galleon approaching the salamander's helmet, removed his face thoughtful. "Did we make the right choice?" Galleon asked quietly. Anselm considered for a long moment. "We made the only choice we could live with. Whether it was right remains to be seen." The Mechanicus forces were already beginning salvage operations, collecting debris from the battlefield, analyzing residual energy signatures. Magos Kael Varin would spend years trying to understand what had happened here, poring over data that refused to make sense according to any paradigm he knew. But the girl herself was gone, beyond their reach, beyond their dimension entirely. Anselm looked up at the spot where the gateway had been and offered a prayer. Not for the Imperium's protection, though, that was always in his thoughts, but for the child who'd fought so hard to go home. "May you find what you're looking for," he thought, "and may whatever gods watch over your dimension grant you peace." Then he turned and walked away, leaving behind the red dust of Mars and the lingering mystery of the red giant that had fallen from nowhere and disappeared just as impossibly. Behind him, the battlefield fell silent. The war machines powered down. The soldiers stood at ease. And in the space where EV-02 had stood, the Martian wind began the slow work of erasing all evidence that anything unusual had ever happened at all. The return. The transition felt like drowning in reverse. Asuka gasped as EVA-02 tumbled through dimensions that had no name, no geometry, no physical laws that her mind could process. Light that wasn't light. Sound that existed in colors. Time flowing sideways through a space that refused to stay still. The entry plug systems screamed warnings in languages that cycled through every dialect the Magi had ever recorded before settling on panicked silence. Then gravity reasserted itself with brutal certainty. EVA-02 hit the LCL pool with an impact that sent waves crashing against the Geofront's containment walls. Alarms erupted across every level of Nerve headquarters systems that had been running search protocols for the past 3 seconds. Suddenly recalibrating to register the impossible. The giant that had vanished was back, damaged, smoking, but unmistakably present. In the command center, Misato's shout of Asuka's name died in her throat as the view screens filled with damage assessments. EVA-02's armor was scorched black in places, melted in others. The left arm hung at an unnatural angle, servos clearly severed. Breaches in the plating exposed organic muscle beneath twitching and raw. The progressive knife was gone, torn away, somewhere between dimensions. The shoulder pylons were twisted wreckage, but the core was intact. That was what mattered. The core still pulsed with steady light, and the entry plug registered life signs. Weak, erratic, but present. "Get her out!" Misato ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos of shouting technicians. Emergency extraction now. Medical team to Bay 7 immediately. Ritsuko's hands flew across her console, pulling up diagnostics that made her blood run cold. Synchronization rate had dropped to 0. The moment EVA-02 materialized, the connection severed as if cut by a knife. LCL pressure in the entry plug was dangerously low. Core temperature was spiking in ways that suggested the resident soul had exhausted itself, keeping the pilot alive during transit, and the damage patterns made no sense. Plasma scoring that matched no weapon in Nervi's database. Molecular disruption consistent with spatial distortion. Trace elements that didn't exist in Earth's periodic table. Whatever had happened to EVA-02 in those 3 seconds of subjective absence, it hadn't happened anywhere on this planet. The crane systems engaged lifting EVA-02 from the LCL pool with hydraulic precision. The giant hung limp in their grip water, streaming from ruined armor, looking more like a corpse than a war machine. Technicians swarmed the recovery platform, attaching emergency power feeds, running structural integrity scans, preparing to breach the entry plug manually if the automatic ejection systems failed. They needn't have worried. The entry plug ejected with a hiss of decompressing atmosphere, sliding free of EVA-02's spine to lock into the receiving cradle. The hatch opened, releasing a flood of LCL that had turned pink with diluted blood. Asuka came out on a stretcher, unconscious, her plug suit torn and scorched in places that mirrored EVA-02's damage. Blood ran from her nose, her ears the corners of her eyes. Her vital signs were weak but stable heart rate, elevated blood pressure dangerously low. The medical team descended on her with practiced efficiency, establishing IV lines, checking for internal bleeding, cataloging injuries that seemed impossible for someone who'd been sitting in a sealed cockpit. Misato ran the entire way from the command center to the medical bay, her rank and urgency clearing a path through crowded corridors. She burst through the emergency room doors to find Asuka already surrounded by doctors' machines, beeping their measurements of damage and survival in equal measure. "How is she?" Misato demanded. The head physician didn't look up from his examination. "Alive. Beyond that, I can't say yet. Severe neural feedback, extensive bruising, consistent with extreme G-forces, minor radiation exposure from unknown source. She's in shock, but her body seems to be trying to recover. We'll know more in a few hours. Let me see her. Ma'am, we need to." "Let me see her." The physician stepped aside. Misato moved to the bedside, looking down at Asuka's unconscious face. The girl looked smaller than she should, younger. Without the armor of her pride and anger, she was just a 14-year-old child who'd been through something no one should have to endure. Misato reached out and gently brushed hair away from Asuka's forehead. The girl didn't react, lost somewhere deep in medicated sleep, but her chest rose and fell with steady rhythm. She was breathing. She was alive. "Welcome home," Misato whispered. In the recovery bay, Ritsuko stood before EVA-02 and tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The damage wasn't just extensive, it was wrong. Burn patterns that suggested directed energy weapons operating at frequencies Nerve had never developed. Stress fractures in the armor consistent with gravitational forces that should have crushed the pilot inside. And strangest of all, repairs that had clearly been attempted mid-battle servo muscles reconnected with techniques that didn't match any protocol in Nerve's maintenance database. She pulled up the black box data from the entry plug, hoping for answers. What she got instead were 3 seconds of corrupted files sensor readings that contradicted each other, timestamps that looped and repeated, and then a gap. Empty data. Nothing. As if EVA-02 had simply ceased to exist for an indeterminate period before suddenly existing again, except the damage proved otherwise. The wear on the progressive knife before it was lost. The power consumption records showing the internal battery had been completely drained and then inexplicably recharged. The trace chemical signatures in the LCL that suggested Asuka had been breathing it for hours, not seconds. Something had happened. Something that defied every physical law Ritsuko understood. And the only person who could explain it was unconscious in medical. Her mind retreated so far into protective shutdown that it might be days before she could speak. Ritsuko made a note in her personal log encrypted and buried under 7 layers of security. Further analysis required. Recommend psychological evaluation once subject regains consciousness. Damage patterns suggest combat engagement with unknown hostile forces. Technology inconsistent with known angel capabilities. She paused, then added one final line. Request Commander Ikari's guidance on classification and disclosure protocols. The sound of running feet made her look up. Shinji burst into the recovery bay, his face pale breath coming in gasps from sprinting through the geo front. He stopped when he saw EVA-02, his eyes going wide. Is she? He started then couldn't finish the question. Asuka's alive, Ritsuko said quietly. Injured but stable. Medical expects full recovery. Shinji sagged with relief so profound it nearly drove him to his knees. Can I see her? Later. Let the doctors work. She needs rest more than she needs visitors. But he didn't leave. Couldn't leave. Just stood there staring at EVA-02's battered frame, trying to process what he was seeing. The invincible second child. The pilot, who never showed weakness, had come back broken. Whatever had happened to her out there in those missing seconds, it had been bad enough to do this. What happened, he asked. Where did she go? Ritsuko shook her head. I don't know. The data's corrupted. We might never know. But that wasn't quite true. Deep in the Magi supercomputer's fragments of sensor data were being analyzed by algorithms that didn't require complete information to draw conclusions. Spatial anomalies, dimensional distortion, energy signatures that matched the angel that had appeared 3 seconds before EVA-02's disappearance. The Magi were building a picture piece by piece, and that picture suggested something terrifying. Suggested that Asuka hadn't just disappeared. She'd been taken, pulled through a tear in reality to somewhere else. Somewhere that had tried very hard to kill her, and somehow impossibly she'd fought her way back. 3 days later, Asuka opened her eyes. The hospital room was white and quiet machines beeping softly in the background. Sunlight streamed through windows that looked out over Tokyo 3's rebuilt districts. Everything was clean and normal, and blessedly, wonderfully familiar. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through her chest, her arms, every part of her body protesting the movement. A hand gently pressed her back down, and she turned her head to find Misato sitting in a chair beside the bed. Easy, Misato said. You've been through a lot. Don't push it. Asuka's throat was dry, her voice coming out as a rasp. How long? 3 days. You gave us quite a scare. Avatar 2, damaged but repairable. Ritsuko says it'll be out of commission for at least a month. She paused. Asuka, what happened? Where did you go? And there it was. The question she'd been dreading. The question she had no answer for that wouldn't sound insane. How could she explain Mars the Titans, the Silver Giants and their psychic assault, the Chaos Rift and its whispers, the certainty that she'd fought for hours in a battle that had lasted only seconds by Earth's clocks? She closed her eyes, seeing it all again. The red sky, the purple wound in reality, the desperate struggle against forces that wanted to cage her, dissect her, destroy her. The moment when she'd almost given up, and the presence in EVA-02's core that had pulled her back from that edge. I don't remember, she lied. It's all just blank. Misato studied her face for a long moment, clearly not believing her. But she didn't push, just nodded and squeezed Asuka's hand gently. Okay, when you're ready to talk about it, I'm here. Asuka turned her face away, blinking back tears she refused to shed in front of anyone. Her body ached. Her mind felt bruised. She'd survived something that should have killed her, and the only evidence was damage to her giant and wounds no one could see. But she was home. That was what mattered. She was home, and she was alive, and whatever else happened, she'd proven to herself that she could survive anything, even hell itself. Footsteps in the hallway made her look up. Shinji appeared in the doorway, holding flowers awkwardly, his face uncertain. He met her eyes and managed a small relieved smile. "Hey," he said quietly, "I thought you were dead." Asuka felt something crack in her chest. Not her pride, but the wall around her heart. The wall that had kept her separate and alone even in rooms full of people. For once, she didn't reinforce it, didn't rebuild it. Just let herself feel the simple, overwhelming relief of being seen by someone who cared. "I came back," she said, and her voice broke on the words. "I came back, Shinji." He set down the flowers and moved to the other side of the bed, carefully taking her other hand. Yeah, you did." And for the first time since falling through dimensions, Asuka let herself cry. Not from pain or fear or despair, but from the simple, profound gratitude of being home, of being alive, of not being alone anymore, even if she'd never quite be able to explain where she'd been or what she'd survived. Outside the window, Tokyo 3 went about its business unaware that one of its pilots had just returned from a war in another dimension. Unaware that she'd faced down an empire and won. Unaware that in some red desert on the other side of reality, forces still analyzed her passage and wondered what she'd been. But Asuka knew, and that would have to be enough. She was Atsuka Langley Soryu. She was the second child, she was a survivor, and she was home.